Welcome to the Nonprofit Podcast. I'm Jenna, nonprofit advocate here at DonorBox. We're here each week with practical actions you can use today to confidently take your nonprofit to the next level tomorrow. As nonprofit founders and leaders, we're often good at getting our mission off the ground, and some of us, like today's returning guest Rachel Sumekh, founder and CEO of Swipe Out Hunger, are brilliant at turning our vision into a successful movement for positive social change. But not all of us know when it's time to hand over the reins. In part 2 of our longer format summer special with field reporter Jared Polivka, Rachel digs deep and shares her reasons for leaving her organization at its peak and has some thought-provoking ideas about when and why this should happen and what has driven her decision to do so. Just a heads up, strong feelings can lead to strong language. And with that said, over to you, Jared.
Hi, Rachel. Welcome back.
Hey, Jared. Great to be back.
So this is part 2/3 because we had to rush part 2 earlier. And this is all about you, the woman behind the organization. And you're transitioning, you're leaving, and you're leaving at its peak, which is a little scary.
Yeah.
And we were talking a little bit about why that is, but can you elaborate a little more on how you're feeling and, what's going through your mind?
Yeah. Well, before I say anything, I'll
Sure.
say that it took me like a year and a half to even vocalize the desire to want to actually leave. As an organization, we've been talking about it for years, right? What happens the day I get hit by a bus or win the lottery and it's time for someone else to be able to step in. So organizationally, we've always been trying to build a really sustainable company. But as the charismatic founder whose the story is so much of what people come to us through, it was always very scary.
Yeah.
I felt guilt around all these people that I had brought in, my board chair, team, all these donors, people that got invested. I was worried that if I was saying I was leaving, then that meant that something was wrong. When in fact, nothing was wrong. In fact, everything was right to the point where we could still be in community together, right? I hope to still stay friends with everyone I've met on this journey, just in a new capacity. So it really was something that took me a while to really come to terms with and work with a coach to feel really comfortable. And then talk to my board chair, Libby Jacobson, who when I told her was if you had waited even a month more, it would have been too long. I'm so proud of you. And just being met with such support. And I felt like I was coming out and she was I love you. And you were expecting someone to say something critical or questioning. And she came in with such support, and having that tone be what set me down this path was really beautiful. And so I think there's a lot of people on this journey that have brought out the light in me and light in our work. And Libby, our board chair, has been a big reason that there has been light here.
Yeah. And earlier we were talking a little bit about vulnerability and how maybe sometimes we keep too much. It's like that show Severance, right? There's a work personality and then there's your in daily life, and how sometimes it's good to bring in some of that, you're not perfect. You're not a machine. Even, you've worked 80 to 100 hour weeks in the past. And especially when you get an organization off the ground, how important is it for you to have a support network? And what things do you do? You mentioned a coach. I think you do therapy. What would you recommend to young women who are leaders in terms of their team or support network or practices?
I mean, the first thing to do is get right with yourself. And whether that's doing the habits, if you know that going on a walk in the morning makes you happier, make sure you go on a walk. Have an accountability partner if you need. Having a relationship with a friend, a sibling who can just be that space where you call. And I'm a verbal processor, so I knew if I kept it in, I would just ruminate. And so there's someone that it was my dad for a long time. It was my brother. I consider all of them my co-founders because the number of times I've called them just to process a meeting. I think for me, it was just that God, it was vulnerable to even call my brother and be I just need to talk to you for the next 10 minutes. I might cry at the end of this, but I just need you. And he's okay.
Yeah.
That was hard for me because I had lone wolf syndrome of like, I started this thing, I'm spending all this time alone. So pulling people in. But something else we were talking about, which is interesting, and I don't know if this resonates with you, but, and I can't believe I'm saying this on a podcast.
That's okay.
But I think I learned also, like, as a person that had to meet with a lot of people and have them feel connected and inspired, how to bring people in real fast. And sometimes that meant like jumping to vulnerability in an earnest way before I might naturally want to, like really like performing vulnerability. It was always real, everything I shared. But now as I like take a step back, or even over the past few years where we've been in a stronger place, learning how to like actually be vulnerable again. Because I'm quote unquote sharing vulnerable things all the time. But like the little bit of fear that comes with being vulnerable, I think I'm like, leaning back into that as my primary source of vulnerability.
I hear you. And it's hard to be vulnerable with people that are not in your inner circle. And thank you for sharing that on this podcast because, you're a storyteller. And when you're a storyteller, you're listening and you're in front of an audience and you're listening to your audience and giving them your energy. But then you're like, oh, I'm in this strategic meeting. Let me drop this vulnerable nugget, right? And then you have said it 200 times over the last 3 years. And it starts to become rehearsed. Not that it's dead, it still has energy because you're a storyteller. You're a very live storyteller. So, I wouldn't say that you're overly rehearsed ever, but some people that's the case for. For Zuckerberg, whose eyes look like a robot's. I'm just saying, is he alive? Is he a person? No, he is. But I like his sister. His sister Randy is awesome.
Yeah, but this is where like you can't separate this self from the work self in some ways comes in, because while it's helpful for me to be able to, every time I tell a story of a student that we served, have that feel authentic, but I can't memorize 1,000 stories perfectly, right?
Sure.
And it always feels so real and I still get emotional. But then being able to go back into my normal life and actually be vulnerable. I mean, like, there's a reason why I was like not single for most of the time, but like single for most of the time I was building this, right?
I hear you.
Or in like different pages with people I was dating because they like thought I was being way more vulnerable than I actually felt in the relationship. So I think I'm like very committed to making sure that people see the two sides and see them as two sides, but like also understand that they intersect a lot.
Yeah. So as a, first generation child of immigrants who, there's some pressure, right? And how do you go about letting go of some of that while also, just being open with what your goals are? We talked earlier off the podcast about making it. We have this desire, our generation, to like live our dreams and follow our passions, and we're about creativity, autonomy, impact. These are very important things in like fulfillment and in like impacting others and helping in our lives, right? Creativity, fulfillment, impact, and autonomy. So, but then there's also like money and straight up money, making it. Like, you live in LA.
Yeah.
It's expensive. So how do you balance those things with those pressures? That's a convoluted question.
No, I mean, it's a question I'm still trying to answer, right? Yeah. I've been very lucky that, when I started this job, my first year I was getting paid like $20,000, right?
Yeah.
I was living with my parents, so that was fine.
Yeah.
It's cute to live with your parents when you're 21. And over the years, like slowly, very slowly, like growing that, and then getting to the point in my late 20s where I was like, oh, like my other friends were able to save a nest egg. Like there's a reason why they were able to buy a home now. Whereas like I didn't spend my 20s prioritizing that. And first of all, I'll say that it sucks that we have this level of the way that capitalism works and how it determines what your life looks like, and the way that inheritance works, and like my people just having money that wasn't tied to their work, potentially changing their access to things and expectations and all of that.
Sure.
So I think it's a societal issue as opposed to a personal one that's like making it thing.
Trust me, I live in Pasadena. It's the land of Range Rovers and Teslas. And then when I'm in Beverly Hills and I used to go on dates there, I'm like going on a date with a person that's got 3 houses and didn't earn any of them. So I get it.
Yeah.
They're born into it. It's fine. It is what it is.
I think that like I'm learning, I'm learning how to balance it all, but I'm like very committed to not having that determine my value. Like I determine my value in myself, and then I take that language into other rooms with me.
That's beautiful. And it's it's about valuing yourself, but then also how you treat others.
Definitely. I think if I see myself as just a normal person who like wants to bring joy and healing into the world, then I treat others with like a smile and like curiosity and warmth. Because like you don't really know who you are until you engage with someone else, right?
Yeah. That's interesting. Do you find any like pattern of like tribalism in LA in terms of like cliques or wealthy tribes or just tribalism in general? Like have you encountered that?
So I'm a part of a community that
Sure.
is extremely tribal.
Oh, which one is that?
The Iranian Jewish community in LA.
Nice. Okay.
So tribal in the sense that actually one of the reasons why I think I've been successful in my role is I grew up with a door that always had my aunts, cousins, people coming in and out. It was like a beautiful way for me to understand community. Like America is an extremely individualistic society. So to grow up where it was very communal and tribal was amazing. And I also saw how when it came time for me to like even move from the Valley to Westwood to go to school or move from LA to Chicago when I graduated, there was pushback. There were moments where my mom is like, we're walking into someone's house and she's like, maybe don't mention that you live in an apartment in Westwood. And some of that could be seen as people trying to limit a young girl. What I understood it to be, and what I think most tribes ascribe to, is by me leaving, it creates a break in the chain. Because if I'm not there to walk through someone else's door to help someone else to be a contribution within this circle, it creates a liability. It creates an unknown within that tribe. And that's a little sad because I love that I grew up that way, right? But if I'm jumping around the world and I'm encouraging my family and other people to do the same, then like, where does that leave us? And so I think that there is tribalism in LA in some ways, in the best ways, within different communities. And in some ways we just need to check it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And how do you, so there's a lot of pros to that community and a lot of benefits. And then sometimes there's judgments or drama, or as any tribe has, right? There's a lot of social pressures. Some of that comes from just being immigrants, right? Your parents are immigrants, and so there's pressure there. Does that affect you in making this decision to leave, or how do you feel?
It's so funny. When I started, my mom is like, cool, you're going to do this for a year, then you're going to go to grad school. You're like, I was like the academic sibling. And so if anyone's going to go to grad school, which is really the American dream, is going to be me. And I'm like, yeah, 1 year. Then I'm like, going back to school. And then I was like, okay, 1 more year. And it got to the point a few years in where my mom and my dad were just like, you know what you're doing. Like you've proven that you know what you're doing. And I think my community kind of gave me that same grace. And I've been really lucky that I haven't felt that pressure too much. Now, like I'll tell my mom, I like went on a date with this guy recently and I'm like, oh, I went pretty well. And she's like, okay. And then like the next week she's like, so that guy, and like that's the pressure that I feel like they haven't been putting on me. That's like starting to creep up now, because I do think that they just want me to be happy, right? And so I always view everything that they say through the lens of like, they just want me to be happy.
And finding a partner is part of that for them.
Finding a partner is a really important part of that for them. As much as I try and learn from the queer community, right? Queer community is not reliant on one-to-one partnerships and silos. It really is a community because it takes many shapes and many forms, and there's so much love. There's such generosity with love, and love is not always romantic, but it's a very generous sibling love. It's And so I like try and educate them. Like Mia Birdsong has a beautiful book on this, that like we can all still be in each other's lives regardless of like a romantic partner.
That's beautiful. The other day I was teaching a workshop to the Council to Prevent Child Abuse. It was like a storytelling and improvisation workshop for parents and children. And before I taught, the lady who was up in front of everyone, her name's Rosie Manella. She was talking about the importance of community and talking to your neighbors and helping each other out and all of this. And the reason why I asked about tribalism is I was just curious because I feel like we're losing a lot of that in terms of knowing your neighbor. I don't know why, but like I'm from the East Coast, and so sometimes in California, I feel like a lot of neighbors hate each other, and they don't even know each other.
I mean, neighbors mostly in California talk to each other when like someone's blocking someone else's view or driveway or yeah. And
it's not supportive. It's not a village, right? Not a village to raise the children. It takes a village to raise the children. That's a common saying, but yeah, it's just really weird here. So I find. I'm curious how, because students need to foster community, and sometimes I feel like when I was at university as the first in my family to go to college, there were tribes, but it was like the frats would like steal the tests, and help their people in their fraternity. When I wasn't in a fraternity, I used to work as a bouncer when I was 19 and bounce frat people out of the bar I worked at. And then before I worked for the godsend Jamil Kadora, who we talked about, the man, the legend, the one and only. And then, there were certain people that would study, and like the Indians would study together, like on campus, like the Muslim community would study together.
Yeah.
And I found it really hard to find a community. I had friends from every group.
Yeah.
I was blessed in that way. And then sometimes I would get invited to join some study sessions, which is nice. I'm just curious, how can we, I don't know, like normalize helping people?
Yeah.
And being good neighbors.
I have a phrase which is Los Angeles operates on a relationship economy where the currency here is who you know. So when my friends want to, like, I'm Jewish, we talked about this.
Yeah.
Like I go to a temple, and before one of my friends wants to go, I say, let me go with you. Like, let's go together. Mm-hmm. So if you were to go alone, maybe you meet one or two people and you don't really connect. But if I go and I stand there and give each of you a 10-second intro, and I have my warmth there, and I do my like Sherpa thing where like I bring you and I like take you to like 3-4 people, then the next time you see them, like, oh yeah, you're Rachel's friend, right? And there's the warmth and the connection. And so I think anytime I'm trying to do anything, if I can, this is the power of a warm intro, right? In Los Angeles, more than anywhere, like no one cares really where you went to school, who your dad is, where you work. It's really that relationship. So I think people just need Sherpas, and people need to be Sherpas.
It's beautiful. It's different. It's so different than, I don't know, the Bay Area is like, what problem are you solving? New York is like, where do you work? Status, right? Like Bay Area, problem solving. New York, status. Here, who you know.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Yeah. Because LA is a weird place where everyone is doing weird things.
Yeah.
And that's what makes it work. Because it's like, oh, you want to be a movie star? Like anywhere else in the world, they'll laugh at you. In LA, they're like, okay, you might actually do that.
Honestly, I think that's why it's been hard for me to find people to interview in LA. It's been easier for me to find people to interview remotely because of the warm intros. But since I moved to LA right before the pandemic, so I don't know as many people here. And I don't know if we would have done an interview if we wouldn't have met in person at that workshop. Yeah. Which was a blessing. And
if you had cold emailed me, I would not have accepted.
Right. And we both know Lewis, but I didn't know that at the time. You weren't really on my radar until we met in person. Which was a blessing. So
the warm intros.
Yeah. Sorry, I went on a total tangent about tribes and communities, but I'm just curious, like what your perspective is. And so we can move on to something else. Now.
I think that just to riff on that, or we can just move on.
Up to you.
I'll say one of the things that one of the biggest lessons I have walking away from this, there's so many, but one of them was really like when we were in a negotiation with a really large company once, would have been a huge deal, our first multi-year company partnership. The company kept screwing with me. They would like cancel the call right before, or like send me a 10-page PDF 5 minutes before the call starts where I don't have time to review it, to like put me in a corner to like just sign and move on.
Wow.
And I was getting really upset.
Bad
like,
vibes.
Very offended. Bad vibes.
Yeah.
But it was a huge, amazing deal opportunity. But the way they were interacting was just not how I like to be interacted with. And
Sure.
one of my board members said, none of this is personal. If you're upset right now because it's offending you, but the work itself is an opportunity, separate yourself from this, right? And that's like mission before ego. It was just my ego of like, I am approving myself. I'm a young woman. I've like made it this far. Why are they treating me like this? This is like patriarchy and racism and status and blah, 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 blah. But, or I can just not think about those things and say, what's the mission here? Okay, this is actually worth it. This is a good deal outside of the way I'm being treated.
Right.
And as long as I don't need to keep working with them, and this is just that we sign this, the deal happens and the impact is there.
Yeah.
So
Did you sign the deal?
yeah.
Okay. And did they continue working with, in other words, did they join your family or your tribe, or was it more of a short-term thing?
It was more of a siloed thing. Where we kind of like did the thing. It wasn't pleasant to work with them, but they loved working with us because we were wonderful, and they were a huge bureaucratic company.
Yeah.
And so the impact really happened, and it opened the door a million times over. So even though we had to like suck it up every time we work with them, the impact, both from the partnership and the doors it opened with other companies after, can't measure that.
I hear you.
Yeah.
If that was more of a deeper partnership that was less siloed, where you had to work with them even more often, where it was almost like they're joining your, tribe in a way.
Yeah.
Yes or no?
Dude, I'm on a mission to end college student hunger.
So it's like, as long as the mission.
I'm not in a bit. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I'm going to make sure this has felt like.
I see.
In the history.
So this is interesting, because this is where we're talking about vulnerability and blending more of our personal with work. But here it's very much work. You wouldn't personally invite them into your tribe or family outside of work. But if it's to make the mission happen, then sure, you can suck it up.
Yeah. Because there are so many people who we do vibe with.
Yeah.
Like our team, we have had 3 meetings in the history of Swipe Out Hunger in 12 years where it was awkward, where like someone didn't say what they needed to say. Like our energy is so good with everyone we work with, to the point where I know that we have so much of that if we need to bring on like one person that's really not a great fit, or like not one team member, but like one entity, but it'll actually help us end college student hunger, then like that's what I'm here to do. I'm like, yes, building a movement that's joyful and nourishing, but a movement that's gonna end hunger, not just exist for the sake of existing.
I see. So you don't have a firm no assholes policy if they're going to help you achieve ending hunger quicker.
You know what's actually so funny? If you ask my team what's my number one rule in hiring,
No assholes.
no assholes.
Huh.
But this is but in the sense that like, and I mean, there were partnerships that were like, and maybe, one other thing I'll say, that partnership was really early on in our career.
Sure.
We had 2 staff, 3 maybe, but very little to lose. Now where we have all these partnerships, we have more access, maybe wouldn't. I don't know.
Sure.
But in that moment, it was something I had, and yeah, I can share a lot more, but I don't want to like give any more details because I'm not going to reveal it.
We can offline.
But like, I mean,
record.
that deal took us 1.5 years to close. A lot because I just kept saying no, like getting the conditions to a place where it was worth it.
Yeah.
So I don't want to come across as like a corporate shill. Like it really did push. But yeah, at the end of the day, like I'm trying to end college hunger because that is more important than anything else.
That makes sense. And I think that if you were going to work with someone or partner with someone outside of this mission in a new venture or a new thing, just because they're family or just because they're part of one of your tribes doesn't necessarily mean they have priority, maybe. I think that Genghis Khan embodied that, who I love. A lot of people don't know he's a pretty awesome guy, actually, besides all of the conquering. He was actually really, really ahead of his time. Wow. Universal religion and like lots of rights for the people. Very interesting things. But he was a big, believer of if the person can do the job really well and has merit, then they can be part of my team. And he went against the society of the steppe, which was very tribal. So he was a big proponent of, that saying, the blood is thicker than water, but the rest of it is, but the blood of the covenant, the people you choose, is stronger than the blood of the womb.
Whoa.
So right? So those who you choose and that bond to serve with, to be in the trenches with, to build, it's actually stronger than what you're born into, or a default tribe. And so he went against the tribal society.
Wow.
And he would fire his brother, even kill some of them, but like he would get rid of people who were related to him or part of his tribe because they weren't doing the job, because he had a mission.
I feel like this is so timely for the moment that we live in right now, right? So like our work at Swipe Out Hunger is about ending hunger, which is a nonpartisan issue. Everyone loves feeding young people.
Yeah.
And we're also very cognizant of making sure that we don't necessarily come across as partisan, because we just passed a bill in Louisiana with unanimous Republican support. In Oklahoma, where a Republican introduced the bill, right? So right now,
there are issues that transcend these factions.
And for me to say that just because, wow, this is getting spicy. For me to say that because I don't fully agree with all the perspectives that Republican in Oklahoma has who introduced our bill, so I'm not going to be in coalition with him,
right,
feels very short-sighted to me, and like morality police in a way that doesn't help anyone. Right? And I'm sure it happens similarly on the right. And I think a lot of people will easily get mad, and that's often because they lack the intention, right? Like, what is the covenant that we are entering together? What is our belief? What's our philosophy? What is our goal?
What's that vision? What's that goal that unites us rather than divides? Yeah, because it's so short-sighted just to say, because you're different than me, or we don't agree on these things, that we can't help these young people.
Yeah. And it gets messy because like sometimes there's real harm in those spaces.
Yeah.
And so how do you train and support a coalition to get to that point? A lot of it is relationship and a lot of it is toughing it out. It's like both, right? Like build relationship to the point where we reduce as much harm as possible and there's like goodwill and conversation. And some of it is like, I don't need to hear that person's comment as truth. I'm moving on because this is a coalition that's going to help us do X, Y, Z.
I love that. You remind me of Jamil, and you also remind me of Genghis.
They both sound like great men.
You're willing to work with people for the greater mission and the greater good. You're also willing to hire people that have great skills that serve the organization, even if they're a slight asshole. Slightly.
No, we have a great team right now.
Well, you're talking to me.
Yeah.
So you're okay with you're serving the mission because I'm an asshole. No, I'm kidding. I'm actually not, but maybe sometimes. So what would you like to talk about? We have a little bit of time left. I want to, it's all about you for this time period, and thank you for riffing with me.
Yeah.
I feel like I just learned a lot.
Cool. I want to talk about, I know we talked about why I'm choosing to leave.
Yes.
But also, I want to tell everyone what that took in the sense that I announced that I'm leaving. I made sure the organization was a great spot financially, that we were recruiting the right people, that we had a strong strategic plan we had just completed.
Okay. I
had a really strong board. That was really important as well. And if anyone wants to go through an acquisition or wants to leave, I've gone through an acquisition, I've left my org, want to be a resource to anyone that wants to know more about that process.
So if anyone needs advice on that, reach out via email or on LinkedIn.
Yeah. I don't want to give any general advice because it's so situational.
Sure.
But I really want to be a resource for that because I think more people should leave their jobs. It is the Great Resignation. And that's for a reason, right?
I hear that.
Yeah.
I left a job last year.
Yeah. It's
you have to do it sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What else I want to talk about? talked about identity.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned you used to have this ritual and you had to psych yourself up before going into a room. That was earlier in part 2. Now we're like part 3. Because you felt jittery, your energy was jittery. But you also mentioned that for so long you worked at being a good public speaker, a good storyteller, and to serve the mission, to get the job done. But now you're working on sounding less refined or less well-spoken. Is that right?
Yeah, I think for most of my career, I was a young woman of color. And I'm also 5'11". I'm almost 5'11". People don't like know that, I guess, listening to just my voice.
You're a tall woman.
I'm very tall, so I take up space.
Yeah.
But I never knew how to really overcome my socialization around being like a young woman of color. So the way that I often would trick people into listening to me or trusting me with their money or time or skills was like coming across as like really put together. Like the looks, the way that I spoke, being able to like jump in on used to say I can talk about any topic for 20 minutes because I needed to meet people at different times. And so I was talking to a friend recently. We were working on a media project together and she's like, Rachel, everything you're saying is great, but you sound so rehearsed. And she's like, I know you're not. I know this is a live thing that we're doing, but it's coming across as so polished. And
so it just too polished. Not even that it was rehearsed and that it's so pre-planned. It's just too polished.
It just sounds so polished. And I think even in this podcast, sometimes like I'll get into it and then like, nope, just like be present and talk normally, which is the opposite of who I've had to be for the past 10 years, right? Like I really crafted myself for this role, which is why like founders are like unicorns in the sense that like you make the job based on what you want and you also become what the job needs. It's impossible to replace, right? Like the person we just hired to bring on to be our new executive director, she's incredible. People are going to look at her resume and be like, yeah, of course you hired them. And also we made sure not to hire someone who was exactly like me because you can't compare. All that to say, now I'm interested in kind of like taking off some of that refined voice and going back to just presence and not knowing what's going to come out of my mouth or where I'm trying to go and feeling more authentic.
Wow. It's like discovering yourself.
Yeah.
And you mentioned off the podcast that you felt like the fear of, am I 18? Can you tell me more about that?
When I first announced that I was going to leave, my brain immediately jumped to, and now you're going to be back in the world as an 18-year-old, like back to who I was 10 years ago before I started this, right?
Yeah.
Which is hilarious that like I hadn't internalized that like this is me that's been doing this, right? It was just like a momentum that never stopped.
Yeah. It's like an identity thing too. And it's like you're wearing this coat of being the executive director, founder. It's like a coat that you put on and you've been wearing it for 9 years.
Yeah.
And now you take that coat off, but you're like, who am I? I'm so naked. I'm 18 again. It's
totally.
Yeah.
Then I have to remember like, no, that's me also. And so the imagery I've been using is I'm taking charismatic CEO Rachel, I'm putting her in my pocket.
Okay.
I have access to her anytime I need.
Yep.
But let me make space for like Rachel who goes on dates and doesn't read the room and is just present. Let me make space for Rachel who goes on walks and doesn't have to be productive and is just like gonna run into someone and talk to them for 10 minutes.
Man.
Or like anything that is just like a different way of operating.
When I lived in San Francisco, I had to remember to like look at my environment when I was walking around the city. I got so caught up in the Silicon Valley lifestyle for a couple of years. And I remember there was this woman that I was dating who was like, don't you see the beauty? Don't you see these flowers? Don't you stop and smell the flowers? Like literally, you know, like it's such a cliche, but it's so true.
Yeah.
That it's not always about productivity. Like you said, it's not always about, I totally empathize with what you're saying because I've been there.
Yeah.
It's wild.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm like learning, what does that version of me appreciate? And I'm like very lucky to have a lot of friends that like validate that. And a lot of friends that are also like, okay, and whenever you want to start a company, we're ready.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people listening, I just want to say to listeners that from having worked in such an intense role also, when you're working 80 to 100-hour weeks, either I was a founder in my early 20s, but also when you're working for other people, if you work a role long enough, it really is like an actor that puts on a character.
And you are an actor, so I feel like I can trust you on this.
You really are. Like, and even though I've been, and I still work as a product manager, but when you go so hard as like a founder or in one of those, I was a developer evangelist for a while too. My boss, Ryan Orban, told me, if you want to get really good at public speaking and storytelling, speak in front of 100 people and only give yourself 15 minutes to prepare and do it as many times as you can.
I don't know if I agree with that.
So he would say sometimes do that, because he was like, you have 15 to 20 minutes. How much can you learn about the topic? And then talk about it. And then also, can you be so good in the room when you're full of a room of experts that you can just say, hey, I know this about this, but does anybody know about this? And actually bring an audience member up to help you and make them feel safe. You could do that. You don't have to, it doesn't all have to be on you.
Totally.
You could collaborate with the room.
I think that is like an amazing realization. Like the moment you realize you're in conversation with folks and you can like ask questions and like actually engage the audience.
Yeah.
I think I love public speaking.
Yeah.
I knew when I was like just getting started, I had no connections, but I had charisma. So like getting on stages was like my currency.
Yeah.
And learning at one point where like I could show up anywhere, just like you described, like give me 5 minutes, I'll come up with a draft and like I can, talk on any topic.
Yeah.
Especially doing my pitch.
And by the way, I'm not saying that my boss was right.
Yeah, no, but it's one strategy.
But it was.
Sure.
I'd love to hear yours, because
Yeah.
you said you disagree, and I have other strategies as well, but I'd love to hear yours.
Yeah.
So just
I guess I would say that there was one of my mentors, John Kabara. He hosted a fundraiser for us in like 2017 at just me and one other staffer at the time. And I thought I was a great speaker, right? I've been doing this like 5 years. Like I thought it was great.
Yeah.
I like rehearsed my speech with him and he just like tore it up. So I really respect it. Oh, this is a fundraiser that like Lewis and I held together with John,
really?
actually. Yeah.
Wow. I'll tell Lewis.
Lewis is also a great speaker.
Yeah.
And John just gave me more notes. And it probably wasn't even that many notes, but usually people didn't give me notes. And I was like, okay. I went back to the office. I stayed there till like late. It was like midnight walking back to my car in downtown LA. And I was like, okay, like this is the most rehearsed I've ever been in a long time. Let's see how this goes. It was one of the best speeches I've given. It was a 5-minute talk.
Yeah.
But it was one of the best because I like channeled my natural talent with a lot of prep.
Yeah, there's a great author who, I'm trying to remember her name. She's the winner of the Moth Story Slam. I met her. I did a workshop with her. She's won it like 3 or 4 times. I'll have to add it to, I can't remember her name, listeners. But what you just said is very similar to some of her process, where she'll iterate on it, get notes from different people, do different exercises, rehearse. And then she'll do a 10-minute story from her life. And it's beautiful because it is a short story. I think maybe what my boss was saying is that if you want to get good at performing and being present and owning a room, only give yourself 15 minutes and you can go anywhere and feel like you can dominate. Like I saw this.
I'll co-sign that.
Yeah. I think that was kind of what he was trying to say. If you want to give an amazing TED Talk though, or something like a fictional story or a true story from your life that's heightened and really brings the audience in, then I think you have to do what you did.
Yeah, just some prep.
A lot of prep.
Yeah.
It takes a lot of work. Yeah. You're awesome.
You're awesome.
So you're working on just finding who you are when you're not wearing this character, right? And also maybe you don't have to speak so well.
Maybe I don't have to speak at all. Maybe there's going to be stealth mode Rachel.
Yeah.
Maybe there's going to be Rachel that just has like really controlled facial expressions.
Or maybe she just nods and goes,
Yeah. I think I'm like really open to, at this point, like making a list of experiences that can like put me in different modalities. Like, you know how hard it's going to be to go from being the most powerful person on a team you fully hired, on a program you fully designed, where your opinion matters so much, to none of that. And this thing is still existing, but no one cares about what you have to say because like that's not your job anymore.
Yep.
And not having, it's going to be crazy. Like I'm getting ready with therapy. I'm like already telling my therapist, like, get ready, it's coming. I'm good right now, but.
Yeah, because you might go work for someone else, or you might start something else, like a startup or another, maybe a nonprofit, maybe not. You might start something else that makes an impact, whether it's private sector or nonprofit sector. That am I using the right words there?
Yeah.
Okay. So you know this better. You know a lot of the language about nonprofits even a lot better than I do. Even though I've built software for nonprofits and worked in it. It's hard. Is that ego though? Is it just ego, or is it like my ego is saying I was the boss, or is it?
Some of it is ego.
Some of it is ego.
Which is easy for me to check.
Yeah.
The part that's hard is value. I was in a meeting with our consultants, board members, some of our staff last week. And of this hour-long meeting, I spoke for 5 minutes because they were designing what happens next with our like new leader and all these things. And it was a phenomenal meeting. They came up with a great plan, but it was just so obvious that like I just wasn't needed, which made me smile. Like, that's amazing. We've made it to this point. And then I was like, oh wow, like I'm going to have to find ways to really reinforce my value at this point as someone who's like contributed so much to feeling like making sure I have my relationships really strong, like my family, like what are other ways that I have my value reminded to me outside of my work?
Mm-hmm. That makes sense.
Yeah.
It's funny because I thought when I was a PM at Udacity, I felt like I was always the dumbest person in the room because I was surrounded by these AI and machine learning engineers, and we would work on things, and I'm really just facilitating, letting them talk all the time because my the relationships or stage presence or storytelling wasn't needed for that role in that way, right? And so do you feel like you're going to gravitate more towards a facilitating servant leadership type of role, or do you feel like you're going to gravitate more towards a craftsman where you build a skill set deeply in one or two areas and you're more of an individual contributor or on a team? So that's what...
I don't think I can ever do the individual contributor craftsman thing as my mainstay.
Yeah.
Like 10% of my energy, yeah.
Okay.
But like the idea of not leveraging all of my experience multiple times throughout the day sounds so hard. Like, why do I need to do that to myself?
Right.
I think I'm really excited, of course, to have ways that I just channel energy in specific ways, but
right.
Yeah.
That makes sense. So more towards your strengths, not going into a new field, like a new expertise building.
A new modality. I think like maybe some new modalities, maybe temporarily.
Yeah.
But the thought of like, I guess I don't know.
You'll see.
Text me in 3 months.
I will.
Yeah.
The thing is, all of your skills that you've built are going to translate.
Yeah.
They're going to help you.
Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like this is therapy.
Yeah. Yeah. No, this is a great conversation.
Yeah.
I think last thing I'll share is like, when you're like, okay, now we're talking about you. I'm like, wait, how do I talk about me without constantly talking about work? So much of like who I am, what I've learned, what I want to share is like stories from work, who I am in that context. And I think that's okay because like it's been my main thing for a long time.
Yeah.
But I'm excited to get some more stories over the next few months that maybe have nothing to do with work.
Yes.
That like also demonstrate who I am and what I believe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. And you're a leader in transition to becoming a new character without having to wear this coat of being the leader. And so that's beautiful. And I wish you luck. And I know you'll do great. And thanks for being brave and just sharing all this. It's not easy to leave something when it's going well and to challenge yourself, to go out of your comfort zone, to try something new, to get to know yourself again, to strip away the armor and character that you've built that makes you feel in control. You're stepping out into the land of not having control. And that's hard.
Yeah. And I also think it's like what we're here for. It's what I'm here for. It's like, I feels right. And I wouldn't even say that it's not easy. I think I'm feeling a lot of ease. I'm feeling a lot of sadness, a lot of grief, a lot of sadness, a lot of grief. But the decision came with a lot of ease once it came.
Mm-hmm. And
the process, thanks to our board chair, our search committee, like all the people, the staff, has also come with a lot of ease. And Adrienne Marie Brown talks about find the ease in things in her book, Emergent Strategy, which has been like a huge guiding force for a lot of my work. If anyone hasn't read Emergent Strategy, got to do it.
Emergent Strategy by?
Emergent Strategy.
Emergent.
By Adrienne Marie Brown.
Okay.
She also has a book called Pleasure Activism, which is all like, why isn't our activism pleasurable? Like, where are the snacks? Why are we not like in deep relationship with each other? Like, why are we doing this in such a sad, toxic way? Like, the issues we're facing are so toxic. Our response needs to be loving and generous and joyful.
Oh my God, I totally hear you. Whenever I see people and I encounter them, oh my God. Sorry, you're preaching to the converted.
Great.
The other day I met some activists and I just stopped and I spent 30 minutes with them. Two young men and actually there's three. 2 young men and a young woman. They're about our age actually, but they're not as experienced as like you. And I told them that you have to relate to people and have fun. Because otherwise you're not in relationship, like you said.
You're not in a relationship. Yeah.
Like they were the worst pitchers I've ever heard. Like going, door to door, or like they're on the side of the street with the sign, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm like, I give them like a 30-minute like little class.
That's hilarious. That's amazing.
And just because I was getting groceries.
Yeah.
It was near a Trader Joe's.
Yeah.
And they were doing activism because there's a lot of foot traffic. And yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
that's a tangent.
I think it's like, I hope that they took something away from the conversation.
I didn't just like ask them to do it. I actually made it all about them for the first 15 minutes. And then I said, hey, would you 3 like some feedback? Because I've done similar stuff to what you're doing right now. And they were like, yeah. And I was like, well, you'll have more success if you try these things. And so I hope they took something away.
I'm sure it stayed with them.
Maybe.
And I think that like that's the only way I've learned, by like watching other people model it. Early on in my career, I was like meeting with someone. This is like first few months that I was even doing this full time. This guy, Eric, I was like pitching him. And he was like, I'm like, yeah, these like dining halls, like they don't want to give this money away. They're so annoying. They're so greedy. And he's like, well, I wouldn't want to work with you either if that's how you talked about me.
For sure.
I was like, holy shit, I can't talk about people I want to partner with as adversarial, right? Like the hunger is the enemy here, right?
Right.
So learning how to like behave in a way.
So you even had to work with Aramark, who I'm very adversarial with. No, I'm not a fan of Aramark. Sorry. Just straight up.
Wonderful.
I'm sure they're wonderful.
Yeah. I mean, I will agree with you. Like there's a lot of problematic practices. They run millions of meals in private prisons, which are like not great. Also,
I'm not a big fan of the prison system in the U.S. Obviously, we haven't talked about that, but yeah.
But yeah, not a big fan of private prisons, and in most prisons. I think that doing our work in a way that models our values as much as we can. Right. Yeah. Sometimes we get mad. Sometimes you got to be mean. Yep. And if we watch Star Wars, sometimes like the Force is used in good and bad ways by different people. I'm sorry. I was gonna try and explain it. Like this is gonna take way too long.
I hope my best friend listens to this because he loves Star Wars. So he'll get it.
I'm just gonna talk about the Force. If anyone has watched the new Obi-Wan Kenobi, wow.
Yeah.
But yeah, just always with love. Which I feel like this conversation was like that. So thank you so much.
Thank you for so much love. Yeah. I would like to say, is there anything that not general resources, but is there any issues that you would encourage people to look into that you're really passionate about? Like you mentioned pleasure activism and how that book affected you and how, why is it not more fun? Why is it not more, why
is the word pleasure taboo?
Right.
We should all want pleasure all the time. Like, how do I make this meeting more pleasurable?
Right.
Yeah.
Pleasure all the time without going down the road of
Sin.
Fahrenheit 451. Like, right, where all we do is we're not in relationships. If you go down the road of pleasure too much, then it's just instant gratification and we're not having a relationship.
Yeah. Pleasure activism.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I would encourage people to read Ryan Holiday, Ego is the Enemy, or Stillness is the Key.
Okay.
Books on Stoicism.
Yeah.
That essentially help you separate mission from self.
Okay.
Those were, God, on repeat audiobooks. I don't even know how many times I've listened to Stillness is the Key and Ego is the Enemy. All of his books.
Yeah.
I wish I had if I pull them up on my phone. Ryan Holiday, phenomenal. Adrienne Marie Brown. I wonder if they've ever been suggested side by side. Maybe. And for any, I think like just getting community, build relationships, find a Sherpa, be a Sherpa. That's like my best advice.
A Sherpa is like a guide, right?
A Sherpa is like a guide, someone who like, I guess like leads sheep in some ways.
So like a shepherd, like Sherpa, similar
Sherpa.
word,
Yeah.
same word.
Like someone who like, guides and knows and makes introductions is how I see it. Yeah.
Beautiful. Well, anything else you'd like to share before we go?
No, stay in touch. Find us swipehunger.org, at Rachel Sumekh on Instagram, and I don't know, stay optimistic. I just got booked to do a speaking gig, and the woman who booked me for U Chicago literally said, so many of our young people are seeing how broken the world is, and I'm worried that they're not going to choose to stay active because that's what I'm seeing. And I think the world is what we decide it becomes. So I'm hoping that people really just stay in action, because if you're in action, then you have a cause for optimism.
Right. How would you recommend as parting words, because you're about to find this yourself on this journey, is finding the thing to focus on? Like either you might call it your purpose, you might call it the focal point, where you put your energy.
Okay, this is going to sound contradictory, but do things like I said with Swipe. I'm like, I'm just going to do this for a year and see how it feels.
So like a time-boxed experiment.
I would say don't see it as something you have to commit to forever until you get to the point where you're like, oh no, I like this. Because sometimes people are like, I don't want to be a person that quits or fails. And they keep going on things that need, not to say like I didn't have a million failures, but there was something in me where I'm like, I need to try again. This has been so much fun. There was so much pleasure in the building process. And so I think making it not permanent forever, like give yourself the chance to experiment.
So experiment, fail, do.
Yeah.
So it's about doing.
Do until it doesn't feel good and you're like for sure done. But until then, keep going with it.
Yeah. And when you're encountering resistance in the beginning and you suck at something, because we often do suck at things when we first start out.
Yeah.
How long do you give it, or when do you know? Because we're all bad at new crafts or new endeavors in the beginning to a degree.
I mean, like talk to 3 to 5 people, because oh my God, there are people I've met with who are like, this is not worth your time. Like go do something else and donate the money. And then I met with people that are like, you need to just focus on this. This is the most important thing ever, right? And so sometimes we, especially if there's like dudes listening, dudes definitely need to talk to more people, because you often have too much confidence. You haven't talked to enough people. And women, sometimes we talk to too many people.
I think I'm in the woman category.
You might be. You seem very empathetic and thoughtful.
I think I talk to too many people sometimes about what I'm doing or about, keep going. So.
Yeah, no, I would say, if at any certain point you're not certain, talking to people and trusting your gut. And if it's still unanswered, then make it an answerable question. Sometimes we ask unanswerable questions.
So frame it in a way that you can answer it.
You can actually say, am I spending my time in a way that's producing the results I want? Am I clear on the results that I want?
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you for that wisdom.
Of course.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I appreciate you.
For sure. I can't wait to hear this.
Yeah. Thanks, Rachel. Okay.
Wow, I know that I will certainly be keeping an eye on Rachel's achievements in the months and years to come. She is leadership goals personified and so inspiring. You can support Swipe Out Hunger from the link in the show notes, and we will for sure track Rachel's new ventures. This was the last episode in this season of the Nonprofit Podcast. We will be back next Thursday with season 3, packed with our usual quick tools, tips, and tactics to fuel your fundraising, great interviews, and a few inspiring surprises. So make sure to hit notifications and join us every Thursday. Until then, stay inspired.
the Nonprofit Podcast, powered by DonorBox, helping you help others.